we've got a fantastic agenda today. Your participation is required because otherwise, it becomes a one-way. Hence Slido. We're looking at a broad range of topics today that in isolation may make sense, but they make much more sense when we look at them holistically.
Teams calls, good thing. Teams calls, bad thing.
It also then ensures like that uncertainty with the supply chain, because we still had customers that still having accidents, still having repairs needed in their homes, etc. So real kind of like a bit of a panic situation. How do we ensure that our supply chain, whether that was a repairer or a salvage agent or a breakdown agent, how do we ensure that they can still get out to those customers that we needed? So it's a whole different situation. So we've did lots of planning, but had never planned for the pandemic, which I don't think anyone had.
I mean, at that moment in time, in a very different way, very similar approach. We almost overnight went from, back in the nationwide days as were, 100 sites down to 60 odd. Just at that moment in time to sort of survive, really, because the overhead of running a business that size is obviously substantial. All of the knock-on effects, obviously, that we knew that had to customers and moving cars around and things of that sort of nature. And all the people challenges that Dawn quite rightly highlights. At the supply chain end, there weren't the same options available. We couldn't take our panel beaters and our paint shop teams and have them work from home. So we had to juggle that. How do we keep the business ticking over and still provide some sort of service, whilst at the same time accounting for team welfare needs, people who did want to be in work, didn't want to be in work, people on furlough, and then of course all the challenge as we started to emerge of getting those people who were on furlough back into the business and firing on all cylinders again. And it's been it's an ongoing challenge. It's not done yet. Obviously COVID, but for me, one of the elements that came from COVID that both James and Dawn have mentioned is a change in perception to work-life balance. People got used to working from home. A lot of our team members saw people in other sectors working from home or their partners working from home. So we've seen an increasing number of the team come with requests to either work more flexibly or to leave the market and seek roles in other sectors where job roles are more flexible. And as I said earlier, that's a real challenge for the body shop sector, where the vast majority of our teams need to be in physical locations in order to carry out their work. So to try and ensure that we in some way build in the same sort of flexibility to their future working careers that they can see emerging in other sectors is a real challenge.
And I think the other challenge we've seen in terms of impact on our business is change in demand. So where your calls used to all come in at 9 o'clock in the morning, now people are working from home. That shifted to sort of your peak time being between 10 and 11 or later on, or you don't necessarily get that lunchtime hit because people can make calls at any time. So I think then trying to manage and make sure you've got resources for those times it's a change in trend. You can't say, well, this is what used to happen, because we're in a different world now. You've got COVID, so we're uncertain on change and demand. It's hard to predict. We've had Brexit, and then we're seeing increased inflationary costs, which is probably a result of Brexit, COVID, and lots of other things. So I think the challenge in the supply chain is how do we ensure that we've got a sustainable supply chain? Recognising that costs are going up, increase in national insurance contributions, increase in fuel costs and parts delays, etc. But which is a collective problem. I think it's not an insurer problem, it's not a supplier problem, and it's about how do we then work collaboratively to go, well, we know that that's not sustainable, so how do we address it? So we really are going to have to be innovative, we've got to be working together, really think differently to go, actually, what are we here to do? We're here to meet the needs of the customer, we're here to repair the customer's cars. How do we take all the other crap that we do that costs loads of money and we spend lots of time on out of that process so that we can do what matters to the customer and address some of those challenges that we're seeing, because those costs aren't going to just go away, so we're going to have to do something differently.
I think one of the challenges the sector's got at the moment, though, most body shop groups that I've had dealings with run pretty lean in terms of their management teams, because they can't afford to have somebody for A and somebody for B and somebody for C. And a lot of that time at the moment is taken up by just firefighting the day-to-day challenges that we've got of parts and SLAs and managing the teams and recruiting and gas prices going up, and I'll go on and on and on. But I don't have a repairer violin. I've got violins for both sides from the time I've spent working, and I think that's an increasing challenge as well. But there's as Dawn says, there's an awful lot of stuff that the sector could be doing that's more forward thinking, but a lot of management effort and management time at the moment is just going into the day-to-day survival and fighting. And so I think there is a risk that we won't leverage some of the things that technology could bring to the table as fast as we could, unless we can find a way of addressing some of the other day-to-day challenges that are across the sector at the moment.
But the other thing about getting diversity, we're only going to get that if we look outside of our normal recruitment, because if we continue to just approach recruitment to get people, well, you've got to have motor experience, or you're just recruiting from the same pool of people, which is going to be the sort of, so we really need to challenge ourselves and think, well, actually, does it matter if they've not got motor experience, but they've got some other experience, and going outside of our own sector to bring skills in is going to widen, otherwise we're just recruiting from the same pool and it's not going to change.
There's now a general acceptance that we'll be able to recruit people from outside of our local catchment area. And when you're on the south coast, you've only got 180 degrees, as you know, Dawn. So that's kind of difficult. And frankly, people in Portsmouth think going to Fareham is like travelling to Scotland. So actually, to be able to recruit flexibly from other parts of the country, we can bring in talent from elsewhere. But we can recruit the working mums. Somebody who's prepared to work for us for 4.5 hours a day is as valuable to us as somebody who otherwise would have come into the office. There's no problem with that. I think the other thing, at the risk of labouring the point, is that we now have an opportunity to use this technology to take away some of the really boring that we get people to do. We employ people to do process. And actually what we're all talking about is asking them to do more important things than that, make decisions on our behalf, genuinely do business rather than push a piece of data from here to here. And there is technology emerging, there's technology that is being used in the form of chatbots and AI and stuff like that. And in an environment where Brexit has stripped out a whole layer of cheap labour, we need to make use of it, because for the first time ever, I think we have an opportunity to automate parts of an industry without making people redundant, and I think that's a good thing.
I think the biggest trend that we've got going on in the market at the moment, at the risk of upsetting everybody I've worked with for the last 30 years in two sectors all in one go, is an element of willful blindness. And we're staggering around at the moment with an increasing amount of willful blindness going on. Now, I'm no expert on the subject, but there's a really great book written by a lady called Margaret Heffernan that describes willful blindness as it's information that you could know and should know, but choose not to. And for me, having worked on both sides of the sector for more years than unfortunately I can now remember, that kind of feels like where we are at the moment. And if we reflect on that for a few moments and think about all of us in this room, no matter what sector you're in, how much do we see going on that we know is going on, but we're just not having open conversations about? And if we don't move on from having conversations like this, which are great, they're a start point, but if we don't go beyond the start point into some actual dialogue, stop pointing fingers at one another and start working out what we're going to do to move the sector forward, I really fear for the consequences down the road.
Actually, what probably needs to change this year is there needs to be a recognition that whilst demand is not currently excessive, it might feel like that, actually what is constrained is capacity. And anybody who doesn't realise that claims and supply are joined at the hip, you can't indemnify your customers unless you're repairing their cars. And I think that what needs to change this year is there needs to be a recognition that the supply chain needs to be allowed to get on doing the core thing that they need to be doing, which is repairing cars. And we need, I think, to take the opportunity to remove the smorgasbord of fluff that we've pushed their way. And frankly, claims don't get cheaper because you put cost into your supply chain. It comes back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what Darren was talking about was a sort of don't ask, don't tell mentality. And I don't think there's any way to conduct business.
What can we do to get back to the basics of repairing a car, delivering a great service to that driver that's lost it, which is in everybody's interest, and doing it in a way that is, from a cost perspective, sustainable for both customers that give us the work and the body shops that need to be around into the future.
I put a deal together to acquire Baldwin's, which I did in July 18, and then promptly started to do a roll-up, which basically involves identifying body shop operations that will fit strategically and geographically with our sort of trading area, and we've been on that journey for the last 3 years. When we decided to accelerate the growth strategy, I pulled a couple of guys in, one from completely outside our sector as a CFO. The numbers in our space are pretty important, the margins are pretty tight, so you need to have somebody with a good handle on that side of it, and also brought somebody across from the dealership space to come work with me as a chief operating officer. So we're quite a small main board, and then we've got an operating board that sits below that. So we kind of built the structure a little bit that was bigger than effectively the business that we were operating in, but with a view to kind of growing into it. One of the biggest problems that people have on buy and builds or consolidation strategies such as we're conducting is they're always playing catch up. So you're always buying businesses, you're growing, and then you haven't got enough staff and resource in the right areas to basically to compensate for the size of the business. And to allow you to, so we identified very early on that we need to have a proper infrastructure in place, and that's exactly what we set about doing. We, for a business that's collective industry, it's worth about 4.5 billion, depending who you ask, about 4.5 billion pounds, kind of washing through it in various areas. It's a very fragmented market, and it's, in my opinion, ripe for consolidation. It's been identified by a number of other people potentially as being a market that needs to be consolidated, and that's through all elements of the supply chain. That's not just in body shops, in distribution, insurer, accident management. There's massive opportunities for consolidation for the right people to come and identify that and to go on that journey. So obviously my space and my chosen space now is in body shop, and we're setting about that consolidation, kind of at a pace, really. So really what we need to look at as an industry is where we can genuinely take the rhetoric and the words and actually to apply it in some meaningful actions that allows us all to have an industry for time to come. I haven't stepped out of doing what I was doing into this space because I thought this was a dead-end route to nowhere. I stepped into it because I saw it as a massive opportunity, and I'm hugely passionate about the industry and the little bit that we can do in my space to try and help and assist that, and working with our partners. And we talk about partners, but we generally do view it as a partnership in terms of what we're trying to do, because what you find, and the body shop's a great example of it, is that individuals can't exist individually. You have to all collaboratively work together. And that's the guy who drives the car, picks up the vehicle, the girl who takes the first call, your front of house team, a panel beater needs a painter, someone needs to turn the car back. There's so many different functions, but it's a relay. You're passing a baton on. And clearly you have an insurer client at the top end, and you have a policyholder who you're trying to deliver a service to all around that. So we have to operate. We can't operate in little silos. We have to all operate together and integrated to genuinely deliver the value that's required. We're a massive technology curve. It's coming from something that's sort of taking off, and now it's really almost like a plane taking off. It's now almost becoming a rocket in terms of the speed of change, particularly around EV and repair of vehicles, and having the guys capable. Heaven help, someone's going to have an accident in a body shop at some stage involving electric vehicle. And you don't want to be the guy that owns a business that's in the face with that. But we're all recognising staring down a barrel as far as that's concerned. And what are we all doing then to make sure that we can invest in our staff and our equipment and our premises to make sure that they're fit for purpose? Because ultimately there's some ownership and accountability when the vehicle's deployed into a repair centre to believe the centre it's been deployed into can actually do that work. But then equally so, it's very easy to say, the labour rate's not right, or the insurers don't pay enough for this and so on. But, at the end of the day, the body shops have also got to look in the mirror a little bit themselves and recognise that some of the contracts that they're signing up to, frankly, are not sustainable. So, but if you're a buyer of that service and someone says, I can do that for £10, and enough people sign up at £10, then that's the value. That's the value. If you say, no, I can't do it 10, I need 12 because there's a changing piece of technology coming down the road and to better repair the cars effectively going forward, I need to invest in my business, in my people, in the technology, in terms of the equipment, then ultimately that needs to have some reward alongside it as well. And we've obviously got the ESG agenda sat there as well, and very right, sort of front and centre at the minute, very topical around PAS 2060 and all that's evolved around that. Well, that has a cost. That has a cost, and I understand why the larger corporates will want their supply chain to be bought into that, and they're going to get a lot of pressure from the government around needing to make sure their supply chain delivers around that. But then there's a cost associated with that, and then we need to work out how we take friction and cost out of the supply chain throughout the supply chain. And Dawn was very right in terms of what she said, and it was saying there's a lot of things that we do that do actually add cost into the chain that really shouldn't be there. So by us all understanding what the elements that we do and how we can take that cost out, and which is what we tried to look at when we first started out in Body Shop, was to say, what's the flow and what's the process, and where can we take out all the different touch points that exist, and how can we use some technology to genuinely improve the flow and process to reduce the operational cost. Yeah. So that we're lean, and we then hopefully become attractive to partners who want to work with us. Yeah. We have the same issues, and I mean, James said the word, and capacity constraint that exists there today is going to be there for quite some time to come. There's no magic fairy dust that's coming down the track. I think some insurers and accident managers have recognised capacity constraint and the issues it's going to deliver, and there's not many body shops that I don't know who aren't out the door with work. And they cannot deal with the amount of volume they've got coming down the track. So there's going to be some tough conversations and decisions based around saying, I can only repair 35 cars, therefore I'm going to choose the 35 cars I repair. That wasn't the case a year ago because everyone was in stage 2, stage 3 lockdown, and there was a lack of demand for our services. Now there's an over demand for our services, and ultimately we have to define and recognise who we can work with going forward, because unlike my days of selling paint, if I sold 100 tins of paint one day and then 110 the next day and 150 the week after, that was just brilliant, just keep turning it up. But body shops don't operate that way. They're restrained by the physical four walls, the team that you've got in play. And if you paint 30 cars one week, you might paint 35 the week after, or 25 the week after that, but you don't suddenly paint 50. So therefore you're restrained by that, and we need to identify that and recognise it. I can categorically tell you if we don't start to do something about it, we'll ultimately come back and bite us, because we have to be investing in every opportunity we've got to recruit new people into the industry, whatever race, colour, creed, sex, should be absolutely irrelevant. We need to attract people into the industry at whatever level, be that from claims handlers, be that people from engineering functions. They shouldn't be limited. We have a lot of jobs that don't involve someone getting underneath the bonnet of a vehicle, and that's not to say that women can't do that as well. So we are going out and actively targeting through our apprenticeship schemes as well, as many young women that we can attract into the business as well as young guys. Yeah. I think the opportunity for consolidation is kind of right now. That's why we're hitting the accelerator. And we're going a bit quicker. But as I told them, I started this latest journey that I'm on in 2018. I was already doing it. My training had already left the station in terms of this. It was a question I was just doing it, but with my own money rather than with theirs. And now I'm doing it with theirs and with mine. So it's a combined effort and a combined force. And we've just done another round of investment, which I've contributed to as well. And we see a market opportunity there to hopefully, to make a difference and to do what, to do what we do, but just to be part of it and part of the complete supply chain, offering a solution to other partners that want to work with us.
It depends on the individuals involved. If we're going to use the technology, we've got to trust in it, and I think that's the big thing for the industry. Let's take advantage of it and let's build trust back into the industry, because it's gone. but AI is going to play a big part. I think especially in that first notice of lost decision-making position, if we can get that right, or as close to right as possible, we can speed up that customer journey, and we can stop making incorrect decisions and then having to move things around. I think building in the intelligence to understand what the capabilities are within the repair network, because not every repairer can repair everything, and use technology and data to triage vehicles to the right place, right time. I think that's a definite possibility as we move forward. And then almost moving away from some technology a little bit, and building that trust back into the system. Let repairers do what repairers are really good at, if they want to be good at it, and repair a vehicle, and allow some of the technology to remove some of the inefficiencies that are sitting around body shop operations.
We know that the whole thing is a good combination of good people with good skills, and good process and good tech. It's not one or the other.
You know, obviously for the repair shops, it's a one-way street almost. You know, the claim comes down, they can send some information back up, but not all information's going back up, so it's still a very manual process for them. And I think it's about trying to help connect the whole of the industry so that everybody within that claim can see what they need to see. So like you said before, if you need to use Teams for an aspect, if you need to use another third party for an aspect, everybody within that claim, the salvage company, the parts company, they can all see what they need to see within that claim, but the shop themselves can still just use that one portal to do that, because I think at the moment there's so many portals that everybody has to update and they're being pulled in all different directions.
Yeah. We've got this AI technology that's remote from the car, and we've got the technology that's sitting on the car, and it's not a massive bridge to get them to work together and bring the AI technology to the car so the car can actually start to do some of that work itself, that it can diagnose the level of damage. It's got accelerometers on there. There's loads of data that tells us what sort of direction of impact and pace of impact, what sort of damage that creates. So if the car can start to self-diagnose how damaged it is as a result of an accident and start to report some of that out quicker, that will speed up that FNOL process. But we've got a bunch of people all sat there trying to get their hands into that first notice of loss bit. I want to be the first person. Yeah. I have to be. The insurer has to be. The claims management company wants to be. There are just so many people, and in reality, we're just in a cycle that every other industry goes through. We're in an innovative position where we've got lots of entrepreneurial people bringing to market minimum viable products. And we all remember the Betamax and VHS thing, but they weren't the only two in the game. No. At the start of this process. They were the two that became dominant, yeah, and then won the battle. And I think in the AI technology, we're going to be in the same position. There's going to be many in the game, and the one that's going to be dominant is going to be the one that manages to tie this up with multiple vehicle manufacturers to make the car make the claim, and fast track that process to get hands out of the process.
I think in terms of that, I think it goes a little bit back to what you were saying before. We've got to trust in what that AI is telling us in the first instance, so that we can then make a decision as to whether to bring that vehicle on site, not bring that vehicle on site, looking at vehicles that are drivable, understanding the connectivity between parts to see where we can get parts in quicker from different suppliers. I think it's got to be agnostic. We've got to be able to connect to multiple parties to be able to bring that claim in a lot quicker and a lot speedier for the customer ultimately.
I think a lot of good work has happened on reclaimed green parts over recent years. The different forces driving that. There's still quite a bit to do. I think one of the challenges is making it really easy for a repairer to see the stock available and select it and buy with confidence, knowing that it's going to be fit for purpose and do the job, and also get there when the repairer wants it to get there. I think, I'm generalising across the industry there, Dave. So I think that there are some recyclers that do that really well and are investing a lot of money into doing that. And I think that there are some repairers who are seeing that and working with the recyclers and getting the benefit. But there's a lot more to do to get that a little bit more commonplace across the market, because it's coming. We know it's coming. It's being driven into legislation, and I guess it's that question, isn't it? Do we want the legislation to be done to us, or do we want to get involved and have a say in what it looks like at the end of it? I think that customers are ready for it, actually. Said quite flippantly earlier on to somebody, customers quite happy to buy second-hand cars.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they accept second-hand parts? And I'm sure that as a consumer, we've all bought second-hand parts for our cars, but it's easy when somebody else is paying for it to demand new. But having said that, studies that we've done through customers and studies that have been done by the likes of Allianz and Ageas and other insurers who are starting to see the value of reclaimed parts suggests that customers actually are quite willing to accept reclaimed parts.
Do you think that's being driven by the, if you like the green ecological movement, or do you
100%.
think that?
Yeah. I think we've probably got a perception in our industry that customers are pushing against it, but I don't think that perception's quite accurate, actually.
Management of the repair process itself, if you've got accurate data at the start, follow the data.
Yeah.
I think every repairer in the room, every insurer in the room recognises that we've got a problem with accuracy of data right at the start of the repair process. It's very difficult to see the extent of the damage in a VDA practice that is very time sensitive. To be able to get every piece of data that you need to be able to put that into a process and follow it through. So get that data right up front.
Yeah.
Repairers are really good at repairing cars. Insurers are really good at insuring cars. The friction is the bit in the middle when you transfer from the insurer to the repairer. Let's take out some of that friction and build back in trust.
It's a really challenging position at the moment across the whole motor ecosystem. So you've got inflationary costs going up, cost of living going up, cost of production going up, and we'll touch on some of this more in a moment. We all know about fuel costs, used car values. There's also a demand for new skills, and we'll touch on skills shortages later. Big increase in electric-powered vehicles, and a big demand, as we touched on in the last presentation, for sustainable initiatives. Unfortunately, the cost of motor insurance is also being driven down, which makes this equilibrium very difficult. There's a shortage of labour, a shortage of cars, lower volume of repairs than we had pre-pandemic, and a decreasing amount of non-electric vehicles. All cost drivers of significance are going up. Labour, cost of production, cost of unit costs, etc. So what's happening to motor insurance overall, because ultimately the premiums for motor insurance is what funds everything in this room, well, they're the cheapest they have been for 5 years, and there's pressure for them to be even cheaper. So lots of consumer bodies at the moment looking at the profits that were made during the COVID impacted year and putting pressure into the industry to bring these down even further. Almost 500,000 less cars sold in 2021 compared to 2019. That looks like it's going to continue at this kind of level for a little while until productions can catch up. And obviously that is impacting on the cost of used cars. So fantastic information here from CAP HPI. The left-hand graph shows the cumulative increase of a 3-year-old 60,000 mile car, which as you can see is 29%. this year compared to every other year that sort of floats around 1 to 3%. So causing a massive change. I do wonder what impact that has on total losses today and pushing more potential repairs into the industry, but also what it's going to do for total loss claims in 2, 3, 4 years' time if a customer's bought their car at 29% more than it was the year before, or book value, whatever you'd like to use. And you can see how that's predicted to continue and not really start to come back down until sort of the third quarter of next year. Somewhere around 90% of 2019's volumes is where we feel it will finish, and I don't think it will get much higher. You can see the same over here on the right-hand side. You can see how we've estimated the finishing point, higher than 2020, but lower than every other year back to 2013. So quite a difficult situation if there's less volume coming in. But actually going back to the point about capacity challenges and skill shortages, maybe that's okay. You can pretty much see without exception that in every single example, whether that's the overall cost, parts cost, labour or paint, they're going up. That's not a surprise really with everything we've been talking about, but also don't forget this includes the changing technology, the changing mix of cars. It's not just a unit price, it's everything included in there. So summary of the last slide, over 1 million less repairs have passed through this industry since the pandemic. So at the kind of average cost you can see here, I'll let you do the maths on the amount of value that's taken out of the sector, which is quite significant. Overall, we've seen an increase here in that period from 2017 to 2021 of 27%. As I say, driven by all factors, with paint being the highest within that at over 30% increase over that period. One of the things we do when we produce our reports is we have consumer intelligence as a media partner who are fantastic, and we do some exclusive studies every time. And one of those was our electric vehicle report we did recently, where 83% of consumers said they will switch within 3 to 5 years. So back to my point earlier, if you haven't got one now, you're probably going to be having an electric vehicle shortly. And also, a really telling point, back onto the conversation we had a moment ago, 72% of customers said they would accept the use of used original parts in their repair, which was, I thought, fantastic. We didn't use the word green, we didn't use the word recycled, we just asked them about previously used parts. There was also some interesting dialogue here around sustainability. So half of them would pay between 6 to 10% more for their product or service if it had a sustainable basis. And actually 85% of them felt that anyone that had good sustainability should market that. So I guess for those of you that are doing lots in that space, I'd start to think about how you can really make a song and dance about that.
And what's happened in Aviva over the last few years is that there's been a massive push on digitalisation, a massive push on innovation, and really kind of pushing forward on that kind of digital front. And due to some other kind of reorganisational things that happened in the business, there felt a need that there needed to be a bit more representation in the supply chain on the supply chain SLT that was looking more outward at innovation in the wider market. Having a big claims innovation technology change program within the business, there was a lot more demand coming into the supply chain for, we want to do this particular piece of change that impacts this supplier, that supplier, that supplier, right, we need to get them on board, they need to do some work, you need to manage them, you need to make sure that everyone's clear what they need to do. So there's that big managing that demand into our supply chain when change occurs. But there's also a lot of it is working with my colleagues in the wider supply chain who look after categories, who do procurement, who do buying, which is understanding the external technology market, both from within the industry, but also what's going on in the kind of insurtech space, but also in the wider external space. And so how does that fit in with our category planning? How does that help us do things like secure supply, generate improve cost performance, improve service performance for our customers? So it's working with those guys in their category planning to make sure that that's there. And then the third piece is where we want to change stuff in supply chain. So we see a unique opportunity, or there's something that we want to do, or a supplier comes to us, working through what can be a process of securing the funding and the change and the resource to make that change happen. So it's kind of three things really. It's the kind of what's going on outside in the market, how can that apply to Aviva, particularly where third parties are involved, working internally with the change and claims operations team, where change impacts suppliers, and thirdly, working specifically with supply chain guys to say what's going on in your categories and where does technology, innovation, new thinking come from to help us drive things forward. You start off with a really wide funnel with that kind of all colours of everything that I described at the beginning to maybe, I don't know, 1 in 20 that you might get to pilot, and then even less that might be something that ends up going live. But the other thing that I find really interesting is the ratio of ideas that come from insurtechs, exciting new startups, people who are going to save the world with a piece of technology, to the ideas that come from our existing supply chain. And my role is across motor, property, legal, everything, so I'm not motor specific. Is kind of, it's very much in that new space, and there's not too many kind of innovative, thought-provoking ideas that come from our traditional supply chain, which I always feel is a bit disappointing, because I think sometimes some of the thinking that comes from the tech startup world, if you were to be able to marry that with what is fundamentally the technical expertise in this room, the people who understand how things work in real life, I think there's loads of opportunity. Yeah. And I sometimes think that's missed. How do we connect up the traditional supply chain, the people who do the doing, who understand the processes and the pitfalls and all things like that, with the exciting kind of technology, innovative thinkers to kind of really drive things forward? And I think it would be great if there's more of that collaboration going on between insurtechs and the more traditional supply chain guys. I think it's going to be really tough and challenging, and I think I'd agree that insurance companies generally aren't renowned for their agility. I've talked about the difference between going from a retail kind of environment, which was very by the seat of your pants sometimes, to something which feels kind of a lot more challenging from an agility point of view. But I think it's coming, and it's maybe not quite as bad as it used to be. But I think one thing that's going to be clear is, and it's been talked about a lot today, and I was quite pleased as these messages were coming throughout the day, is connectivity between the supply chain and its constituent parts. I think the connectivity between body shops, between hire car companies, between recovery agents, between salvage agents, all understanding and sharing the kind of same information and data is going to be critical to making some of those changes happen. I think it's historically been quite siloed, and I think body shops do this bit, hire companies do that bit, salvage companies do that bit. I think that's all going to change, and and those who kind of get on board with kind of connectivity solutions and plugging in and sharing of data and being a bit more open, I think is going to be how we're going to get through some of those challenges. And that's absolutely one of the benefits that having Solus as an owned entity gives us, is the ability to kind of test some of this new stuff, but also Solus are the kind of spine of our vehicle damage strategy. Yep. So having that owned entity means that, and all of our technical knowledge now sits within Solus. We made some organisational changes, so everyone who's got something to do with understanding how a car gets repaired now sits within Solus and under that remit, which I think works really well, because you've got the technicians who are fixing the cars together with the engineers who are kind of overseeing that kind of cost control, together with service delivery people who are overseeing the management of the repair process, all sit under the one banner. So that's really important, having that expertise sitting there. It means that we can, I think we understand at a more granular level the component parts of vehicle repair by having that expertise, particularly as new types of vehicles. A lot's been talked about EVs today, and understanding how they get fixed, and that's important around feeding that back into our underwriting and our actuaries around what vehicles are we going to underwrite, where are we going to place our risks, what are the costs, and it's a lot more dynamic and flexible when it's coming from your own operation. I think the other thing that Solus gives us, which again was talked about this morning, is the ability to develop young talent through apprentice programs and things like that, and start getting people interested and excited in what it takes to fix vehicles. And hopefully those young people have got new and different ideas around the world that they grow up in being different to the world that we all grew up in, to bring that dynamic into the industry. So I think there's a really important part around, it's also almost a corporate responsibility piece around making sure that it's sustainable for the future, and there's people who understand how cars get fixed, who are part of the future of this industry going forward, together with all the technology and change and innovation challenges that we've got. So we did some work where we roughly think, and this is across all of our claims, home, motor, everything, where 85% of our claims have some kind of contact with one of our suppliers, because they are the moment of truth, as you say. That's the place where the indemnification happens. And we used to say in supply chain that it's the first person that you meet face-to-face in a claim is the supplier. What we're seeing with the increase in digital and the automation that's now kind of proliferating across the industry, I think we see ourselves as at the forefront of that, but we know there are people who are kind of hot on our heels around doing even more digitally. Digital claims journeys, e-nols are kind of only increasing. And what's going to happen and what is happening is our suppliers aren't only the first face-to-face person they've had contact with, it's the first actual person they've had contact with. So that moment of truth becomes even more important, and the information that insurers share with the supply chain, making sure it's accurate, making sure the right decisions have been made, making sure where there's AI or analytics involved, that's been programmed correctly to make the right decisions, or you can drop things out quickly in order to kind of pick up those customers and step in. So I think the dynamic is there. I think it will continue to be there, and I think it will get even stronger. And I think that's where the collaboration, connectivity, technology, because it's going to be powered by technology.